Hi everyone. I wanted to give you some more feedback on the work in the discussion forum about case 135, the case that deals with the Beagle Channel negotiations. And so we I presented to you a number of questions in those different discussion threads, and there has been some really good posts there. I already provided you with feedback in the text, but I wanted to kind of highlight a few more points here. Number one, in the question that I presented to you of why are they fighting over a bunch of rocks, many of you have pointed correctly that this is for Chile and Argentina. These are not a bunch of rocks, but important islands. And they're important not necessarily because they have great natural resources or because many people live there, but they are important because their location, because they control a passageway, a water passageway, the Beagle Channel, that is crucial, especially for Chile, that want clear access into the Atlantic Ocean without having to pay any dues to another country. Without them having that control over those islands and over half of the Beagle Channel, they will not have this clear and open passage into the Atlantic Ocean. And so that becomes much more important than a bunch of rocks. There's also a symbolic value involved there, especially once the exchange started and negotiations stall, and then nobody wants to be the first one to blink, right? Everybody wants to save face and show that they held up to their goals and they didn't change their opinion. In addition to that, there is that general question where we see a lot of international disputes that are related to islands, sometimes or even many times islands that have no people living on them, or that are very small, or not even an island that's completely over the ocean. If you look into the South China Sea or the East China Sea, some of those islands that are being heavily contested are actually mostly covered by water. And so we have that question of territorial waters and maritime territory and how far that extends from the shore. Some progress have been made on those questions generally in international politics with the passage of the UN Law of the Sea, but that was after the case that we are dealing with right in here. Obviously, control of the oceans is important for passageway that could have impact for both national security and, of course, economic activity. But also it is important for the resources that you can harvest from the ocean. And again, this symbolic value, this we control the sea. So recognizing that, the international community did come up with international treaties, multilateral treaties to govern that, but that we can still see those cases where there are sticking points. You guys, when I ask you about what are the interests for both of those countries, you very, very, very well have have dealt with those issues of high and low politics and how the regime type, which was a military regime at that time for both countries, how does that play into that? Military regimes tend to be more comfortable with using force and with recognizing or framing everything as a national security issue, that the solution to it would be military. And then if we are framing the situation not as national security but as economic interest, does that make it a little bit less important? Can we then see a little bit more forthcoming and willingness to negotiate and talk about things? We see the two sides start with going into arbitration, formal arbitration, this process where you both agree for an arbiter that's going to hear both sides and make a decision, and you agree ahead of time to accept that decision. But arbitration takes a lot of time. Many times it takes years. And like in this case, the arbitration went to the UK, to the Queen, and by the time the resolution came down, Argentina didn't feel that the arbiter was impartial anymore. They thought it was in 1972. They didn't think that way in 1979. And that arguably gave them the permission to step up and say, well, we don't accept the arbitration. So then they tried direct negotiation. What can we give each other, or what kind of a process we can establish to make those decisions? And when that failed, they started to mobilize the military. Mobilizing your military, even if you're not going to use it, is a very useful way to put pressure on the other side. So not only I have the power, but I'm willing to use it, or arguably I'm showing a willingness to use it. And so because both sides mobilized, we get into this head-to-head situation, and we're playing a game of chicken. Who's gonna blink first, right? And this is where, of course, we see the attempted interventions by some third parties, other regional powers, including the United States and the UN and others, that wanted to try and stop Chile and Argentina into actually going to war. But the two sides were saying that they will go for mediation. Then the Argentina top leadership said, no, we're not going to go for mediation here. What does that tell us? That tells us that especially in non-democratic or less stable governments, we can't always trust what the representative in the negotiation round is saying. Not because that representative is not telling the truth or directly lying, but mostly because there may be a level above that person that can overrule them. And even though the foreign minister agreed for mediation, the military junta above him stepped up and said, nope, not gonna happen. And so, of course, it's much harder to do business or to approach negotiation when you are dealing with a less certain future of would the agreements be respected in the future, right? The next set of questions that I presented to you about the intervention and specifically about the papal mediation, there's a lot of good discussion in them as well. But I would like you in the next couple of days, before we close down this discussion forum, to go back and try to post in one of those threads you haven't posted before, and or build on some of the prompts that I try, or questions that I tried to present following up your first round or comments, and think about it. How can we solve a situation like that when both sides are ready to rumble, right? They're mobilized, their military, they're sure that they are the ones who are in the right, and they just won't budge. What is the next step? And the next step was the papal mediation. So go back, look at my comments, go back to the text if you need to, and post your second or third or fourth comments in the discussion thread, so we can develop our case study discussion even more.